Ed here with the Digital Digest, and today I wanted to share a quick unboxing and first look at the Sony A9 Mark II. Now, as you may have noticed, this is not a retail box. This was furnished for review by Sony. So let's get this thing open. $4,500 US is the price of admission for their latest and greatest Pro Series camera. And while this wasn't met with as much anticipation and joy as maybe Sony would have expected out of a new launch like this, I still think that this camera, thus far, I think it's about 2 weeks in, is very well received. And that's because even though we didn't get a new sensor and we didn't get a new EVF, and yes, it's still $1,000 more retail than the previous gen, we did get a vastly improved camera. Autofocus improvements, at least from everything I've read and seen, this camera does a better job than the previous gen A9. We also have better connectivity, USB 3.2, so not just Type-C, but the latest. We also have two UHS 2 card slots, which may not be a barn burner for anybody, but I think pros will appreciate that in just about every way. We also have voice tagging or voice memos to images now. We also have better weather sealing, and we have new ergonomics that I think is going to, for the most part, make many pros very happy, as well as regular consumers, because I don't think that it's outside of the norm for consumers to possibly be interested in this camera as well. Now, I haven't used it yet, but again, if it really does outperform the original A9, and you have improved ergonomics, improved Wi-Fi with the new dual-band chipset, and this really just builds on the A7R4 in terms of its control feature set, the new buttons. These are all things that everyone should be happy about. I understand wanting a new sensor. I understand imagining that they may have been able to make the camera faster, and wanting a new EVF. But if those things had to remain the same, but everything else was improved because of the new chipset, battery life is even improved, then I see this as a win across the board. And if you don't care enough about those new features, you can always get the A9 Mark II on sale. So the Type-Z battery charger, strap, power cord, that's it. So, I mean, really what I'm most excited, put this back in there as well, this is going back to Sony soon. What I'm most excited to try this out with is what I should be, and that is my G Master 100 to 400 millimeter lens, as well as the new 200 to 600 millimeter lens. That is not a G Master, it's a G Series lens, but still, I would say the most promising, at least in what I have available, to really demo the capability of this camera. And there is the 70 to 200. I'm going to go ahead and mount it right now because that's where I'm going with this. And for those of you wondering, this was also furnished for review by Sony, and the idea was to get this exact pairing in play. And I mean, even though I do have the G Master, this is a lens I'm more curious about since this is brand spanking new and less expensive and has greater reach than my 100 to 400 mil G Master. This is a pretty big combination, but it doesn't break the bank, and you still have 600 millimeters, and both of these have gotten very good reviews, so I'm excited to test it out, see how things go. Remember, with the A9 Mark II, you are not going to get a 4K video monster in terms of color profiles. There aren't any. So unless Sony has done something I'm not aware of, you have to remember this is absolutely a still camera first. It can still shoot exceptional 4K video. I mean, the in-body stabilization, you have 5.5 steps gained because of the IBIS. It really has everything going for it, as I've already mentioned, just with a better, in terms of actual design, better ergonomics, and more flexibility when it comes to direct controls on body. So, I mean, outside of the price, which is still arguably a bargain compared to the competition, especially when you take into account performance, I really am not sure what the world was expecting in the A9 Mark II. The only thing I could have made the argument for was possibly a slightly higher rated sensor. If we could have gotten into the 30 megapixel range, around 36 megapixels, somewhere there, that it's a nice middle ground without getting ridiculous. And I think a little bit beyond halfway to the A7R4 sensor would have been a realistic option. That's probably the only thing that I would have personally wanted, because that would make the A9 Mark II very appealing for me personally, which at its current state, I think it's going to really appeal primarily, as I've stated in my preview of this camera, to professionals that are shooting for a living and do need these new advantages that are brought with this current generation. I mean, it's got pretty much everything, this camera. So, I'm, again, excited to take it out there, see how it performs, and I expect good things. This is the flagship camera for the Olympics from Sony. So this is what they were waiting to drop on pros that rely on this for their living. So if it doesn't appeal to you, there's probably a reason, and I get it completely. If it does appeal to you, I also completely understand, because this is possibly the best camera, and I'm going to go across the board. I'm including the A7R4. So even though the A7R4 was just acknowledged as the best landscape camera on the market by DP Review, this camera, in spite of having a 24 megapixel sensor, is still, I think, if it lives up to the potential, as I've stated, the best camera on the market. Because with that autofocus, yes, it's nice to have more megapixels, but even at 24, if this outperforms everything else, then it is the best camera on the market. Because realistically speaking, unless you really need a crazy amount of resolution, which you could be stepping into medium format at that point, this camera delivers it. So I don't think it's just for sports. I don't think it's just for fast-moving autofocus capability. I think it goes beyond that, and I think it's obvious that this camera can be used for more. And I do have a battery in there. I was wondering, I just thought to myself, did they include a battery? It felt like it. I mean, I know the camera's beefier. I know the weather sealing's improved, but when I took it out of the box there, it felt like it was a little bit weighted. And by the way, it is. I mean, compared to the previous gen, you're going to do better with large lenses like this. And I will be testing my 100 to 400 G Master, as I mentioned as well, and some prime lenses, just to see, again, is this the best that's out there? And at its price point, and with it being the sequel to the A9, I think it probably is. And this might be the first time that I start to consider the A9 series for personal use, because I'd rather have less megapixels and best-in-class performance that no one else in the industry can touch. The A7R4 has that 60-plus megapixel rating, but it doesn't have this sort of performance. I mean, it has many advantages. I can't do a comparison because I no longer have that camera for review. I would if I could. But you see where I'm going with this. It's just another class of camera, and it's meant to appeal to a different class of consumer and pros. But I think that it possibly could start to overlap. We'll see. Any questions or comments, please feel free to post them. Hit that like button. And as usual, please feel free to subscribe. Later.